Hello and welcome to Byju's Exam Prep IAS. Let's begin today's daily quiz with question number 1 on your screen. Consider the following rainfall distribution categories by the Indian Meteorological Department or the IMD on an all India scale. Number 1. Normal or near normal is when the percentage departure of actual rainfall is plus minus 10% of the LPA, that is about 96 to 104% of the LPA, which is the long period average. Second, below normal is when the departure of actual rainfall is less than 10% of LPA, which is 90 to 96% of LPA. Above normal is when actual rainfall is 104 to 110% of LPA. Deficient is when departure is less than 90% of LPA. And excess is when departure of actual rainfall is more than 110% of LPA. So a lot of data, a lot of numbers with respect to rainfall distribution patterns of the IMD. You have to tell which of these given statements and given categories is or are correct. The correct answer here is D. All the 5 given statements about the categories of rainfall distribution are correct about how IMD measures rainfall distribution across the country. The reason why we are discussing this is Meghalaya's Mawsynram, the world's wettest place, has rewritten its own record for the highest rainfall in 24 hours since June 1940. Mawsynram received 1003 millimeters of rainfall in 24 hours, beating its previous record of 945.4 mm. Also, Cherrapunji was a near second when it received a 24-hour rainfall of 972 mm to become the second wettest place in India and in the world. In fact, Cherrapunji's record rainfall measures close to 2500 mm rain in the last 3 days, which has triggered one of the worst floods and landslides in Meghalaya's recent history. Next, question number 2. Consider the following statements about the properties of urea. Number 1, it is acidic in nature. Second, it consists of nitrogen and oxygen only. Third, it can be used to supplement cattle feed. Which of these given statements is or are correct? The correct answer here is B. 3 only is correct. First is wrong because urea is essentially basic in nature and not acidic. So the second is also wrong. The word only here can be a key indication. Urea's composition also includes elements such as carbon. The third statement is correct. Urea is essentially used by a lot of farmers as a supplement for their cattle feed. The reason why we're discussing this question is for the first time, India will buy a huge consignment of urea from the US. Now, India has been an occasional buyer of the urea from US, so that is not new. But just that we were never buying such a big quantity of urea from other nations such as the US. Usually, India imports urea from China, Oman, UAE, Egypt, Ukraine, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. But now we have tried to diversify our buying of urea and we are getting it at a pretty good rate from the US. Next, question number 3. Consider the following statements with regards to the FATF, that is Financial Action Task Force. Number 1. Grey list has countries that are considered safe haven for supporting terror funding and money laundering. Second, countries known as non-cooperative countries or territories are put in the blacklist. These countries support terror funding and money laundering activities. Third, the FATF was established in 1989 during the G20 summit in Paris. Which of these given statements about the FATF is or are correct? The correct answer here is A. First and the second statements are correct about the black and the grey lists that are often in the news. The third statement is wrong because FATF actually came into being during the G7 summit in Paris in 1989 and not the G20. As you know, the Financial Action Task Force is an international organization which was formed by the G7 to assess how the nations are using their powers with respect to finances. If a certain nation is seen as being supportive of terror funding or money laundering, they are put into grey and blacklist, as a result of which it becomes difficult for those nations to get funding from international institutions such as the IMF. This is in the news specifically because Pakistan has been placed in the grey list of the FATF for a long time and they have been continuously making efforts to come out of it. The FATF in its recent meeting has said that we'll try and take Pakistan off the grey list after an on-site check in Pakistan, so it might happen in the coming few months. Pakistan government on the other hand has said that ever since we have come to power, we have tried every single thing to ensure that we comply with the directions given by the FATF, and there is no reason now for us to be placed in the grey list. Next, question number 4. The Amal puppet, which is in the news recently, is on a mission to raise awareness about which of the following issues: the Syrian refugee crisis, removing IP barriers from COVID vaccines, child labor in Western Africa, or increasing monkeypox cases. Now, this is one of those news stories which have not really been covered in India as such, but it has been covered very, very widely across the world. The correct answer here is A. So, this Amal puppet is actually a puppet which is 12 feet tall, which depicts a 10-year-old Syrian refugee. This puppet has been on a tour of multiple nations and has already visited multiple nations across the world. This puppet is on a mission to raise awareness about the problem of the Syrian refugees who are still continuing to flee their country in search for a safe and peace home. The puppet is designed to highlight the plight of millions of Syrian refugees who are forced to rush into Europe. They have traveled long distances to flee their country's civil war and have endangered their life to cross the Mediterranean and enter Europe. This entire puppet is being operated by three people together because it's huge in size and it is being supported by nations across the world. As you can see here, it visited France last year and it is still going on to visit different places. Next, we have a previous year question from 2021. This is a question from Indian economics. Which one of the following is likely to be most inflationary in its effect? Repayment of public debt, borrowing from the public to finance a budget deficit, borrowing from the banks to finance a public deficit, or creation of new money to finance a budget deficit. Now, as you know, inflation mostly occurs when there is a lot more money supply in the market, and thus the prices of the commodities increase because the supply is limited, while the people who are demanding those commodities have more money in their hands. This is usually a result of government spending more money, printing out more money and giving it to the people in the form of the welfare schemes. Thus, creation of new money in order to finance the budget deficit will have a direct consequence of increasing inflation in the country. When the government repays a public debt, as is the first option, that means government is just returning the money that it had originally borrowed. These funds can be used by the banks to make new loans. The RBI also can now suck up this money in the form of monetary policy, so it might not really result in big inflation. It might have certain mild inflation, but not much. But the one thing that will result in inflation without any doubt is printing of currency, as we have seen in many countries in the past, including Germany and Zimbabwe recently. In fact, after World War I, when Germany had to repay a lot of money as a form of the war crimes as part of the Treaty of Versailles, they resorted to printing money in large numbers, as a result of which their currency lost the entire value. It is said that the people had to fill in bags of money so that they could just buy a loaf of bread. Something similar happened in Zimbabwe recently as well. Next, we have a fact of the day, and today we will be discussing about the Interstate Council, which was established under Article 263 of the Indian Constitution. The reason why it is in the news is because recently Tamil Nadu Chief Minister wrote a letter to the Prime Minister saying that there should be at least 3 meetings of the Interstate Council every year. This is the only way in which we can strengthen the spirit of cooperative federalism. On the contrary, the sad reality is that since it has come into being in 1990, the Interstate Council has only had 11 meetings in all these years, which is a very, very sad reality. The government says that we are cooperating with the states on other platforms and we do not need to duplicate our efforts in the form of the Interstate Council. Now, as you know, Interstate Council has been formed to support the center state and interstate coordination and cooperation. It came into being as a result of the recommendation given by the Sarkaria Commission in 1988, and that is how in 1990 it came into being through a presidential order. The Prime Minister is the chairman of the council, and the members include the chief ministers of all the states and union territories having legislative assemblies, administrators of other union territories, 6 cabinet ministers from the union government level, which are nominated by the Prime Minister, are also members of the Interstate Council. At a time when the center state relations in India are turning sour over a lot of issues, including the GST, the misuse of central government agencies, etc., it would be a good time to revive the interstate council and the center and the state to come together and discuss issues to take the country forward peacefully in a positive manner. This is all for today's daily quiz video. Thank you so much for watching.